We will return to the northern plains and the Great Lakes region around 1450. The Haudenosaunee people, the Lakota people, the Agwe people, dozens of ethnic groups live in harmony in a season that may be ruthless. This is a world without the metal tools and wool blankets brought by European raid, without horses and without guns. In this world, survival is entirely dependent on what the land can offer and what humans can create with tree bark, animal skins and bones. Winter here is more than just a season. This is a test of your survival knowledge. Let's start with you. Not as an observer, but as a person living within it. Someone who wakes up every morning not knowing whether spring will come or not. When you wake up, you immediately realize that there is something wrong with your body. The air you exhale is white, bubble-like substance that quickly dissipates in the bitter air. This feeling is very uncomfortable. It sharply reminds you that the warmth you brought into sleep has been sucked away and stolen by the cold of the sleepless night. Your joints feel stiff, as if someone had replaced your bones with frozen wood. Moving fingers requires conscious effort. The bison skin that covers you at night absorbs the cold from the ground and sticks to your skin, feeling heavy and cold. Around you, others are equally reluctant. No one has spoken yet. Speaking requires energy, and energy must be rationed like food, warmth and hunt. The shelter above your head, if you can call it that, is made up of branches woven together with hemp ropes, covered with anything your family has prepared before the cold arrives. It can prevent the wind from passing directly through your body, but this cannot drive away the cold. The infiltration of coldness. Every crevice, every loose weave, every breath that creates the slightest warmth is filled with coldness. This is your home for the winter. This is not my choice. It's because it takes 3 days to walk to the permanent village, and these 3 days might be equivalent to 300 days. At that time, the snow will be waist-deep, and the ice crystals blown by the wind will cut through the exposed skin like small knives. You lay quietly for a while, listening to the sounds of winter. The wind, always the wind, creates its own language when it passes through the bare branches. From a distance, you hear the sound of a tree splitting in the cold, but sharper and more direct. It reminds you that winter will destroy everything. Trees, bones, souls, as long as you are willing. Getting up means you are leaving behind the little warmth you have saved during the night. There was no fire this morning. There was no dry wood yesterday. The fire will still get wet. Fire, when it comes, must be obtained through patient work. Then the driest wood, and ignite the spark with your almost numb hand. But first you must dress for survival. This does not mean wearing a woolen coat or leather boots. On the contrary, you start a careful layering process, which will determine whether you can live another day. First of all, the innermost layer is a soft dough wrapper until it feels like cloth and is smoothed by your mother and grandmother's hands. It is close to your skin but very thin. Very beautiful, but very thin. Next came the heavier animal skins. This hair is still there, if your family is lucky when hunting in autumn. Buffalo if you have abundant blessings. But it is more likely to be deerskin or rabbitskin sewn together. Dozens of people are making a patchwork garment that makes a soft rustling sound when you move it. The outer layer is your wind-proof armor. The exposed skin is thick and dark. The hair on your hand is very rough. It's very heavy. It's too heavy. Once you put it on, you need to change your way of moving and breathing. But it reverses the wind direction. The change of wind direction means whether to live until dusk or become another story of winter hunger. Your feet will pose challenges to you. The moccasins are lined with grass you collected before the first ice formation, and are stuffed with the furs of small animals caught during good times. They are beautiful in their own way and made with the skills passed down from generation to generation, but they are not waterproof. They are not as heat-insulating as modern boots. They are merely the best things created by human hands from what nature offers. Length does not refresh you, it does not energize you. Where will your feet land? Will that white surface of snow support you, or does it hide a kind of depression that will deeply chill your knees and instantly soak through your shoes? Going outdoors means entering a landscape that is almost unlike what you knew in autumn. Snow has changed everything, creating a unity that is both beautiful and terrifying. The familiar path vanished, buried under the snowdrifts that were reshaped by every gust of wind. That berry bush where you gathered food a few months ago has now turned into a mysterious white mound of earth. Their bounties are kept somewhere beneath the surface, but they are out of reach. The coldness here is different from what people experience today. This is not the kind of coldness that comes from walking from a heated house to a heated car. This is a kind of coldness because you know that apart from what you can create with your own hands, your own breathing, and the energy you carefully allocate, there is no warmth waiting for you. It penetrates deep into your bones with an almost thoughtful patience. First, your fingers start to lose sensation, not all at once but gradually, just like the tide going out. Then your toes move further and further away from you and are no longer under the control of your consciousness. The cold current moved inward, gradually occupying territory bit by bit. Your face felt bitten. Your skin immediately tightened. You learned to breathe through your nose, heating up the air before it reached your lungs. Breathing through your mouth brings the cold directly into your body, causing a kind of pain that spreads to your chest. But perhaps the most challenging thing is the impact of the cold on your thinking. Thinking becomes more difficult, not impossible, but slower, as if your thoughts have to pass through thick syrup to reach consciousness. In warm times, some simple decisions, such as which direction to go, whether to rest, and how to position oneself to conserve energy, all require careful consideration. Finding fuel became the top priority of the day. But it was an unguaranteed task. The obvious choice is the fallen branches and dead wood, which have been exposed to rain and snow for months. They were soaked through with water and frozen solid, making them more likely to extinguish the fire rather than feed it. You must think like winter. Sometimes in cold places, some dry substances are left under the big trees. The tree canopy creates a small shelter in the hollow wood, which has not yet completely rotted under the hanging rocks, and the snow has not yet seeped in. But even if you find dry wood, the process of making a fire stools which makes this task much more difficult than it is today. There were no matches, no lighters, and no bundles of newspapers for easy ignition. On the contrary, if you are lucky, you can use flint and steel or flint and fire fundus to strike the spots one by one onto the materials, which must be fully prepared to catch and hold the flame. Your hands have frozen stiffened, you must do some delicate work. If you apply too much force, you will scatter the fire you have carefully collected. If there is too little, the spark will go out before it forms. While all this is happening, the wind is trying every possible way to steal your efforts. Cold can make your fingers clumsy and your reactions slow. Warmth does not refresh. Sometimes you have to accept that this will be a night without warmth. A night of endurance rather than comfort. These nights not only test your body, but also your spirit to see if you believe that morning will eventually come. The food in winter is different from that in the harvest season. It has become scarce, precious, and often tiresome, which shocks anyone accustomed to a wide variety of species throughout the year. The storage, if you have any, is composed of things that can be preserved in the preparations for autumn. The corn is dried in the sun until the kernels creak like stones. Cut the meat into thin slices and dry them until they are like leather. Berries are pressed into compact cakes and stored in containers made of animal organs. But with insufficient inventory, the challenges brought by winter hunting go far beyond the simple issue of a shortage of prey. All animals have their own survival strategies. Deer have migrated to lower altitudes or deeper areas covered by forests. The mini-miner's game has gone underground or hibernated. The remaining birds have become so exhausted that they are hard to approach. Hunting in thick snow means slowly and with great difficulty traversing terrain where every step is challenging. Your snowshoes are woven from ox knees and wood with the skills of several generations, but this won't make your journey any easier. Every step is sinking. Every step forward requires conscious effort. Snow got into the coves around your feet and stuck to your hair and eyebrows. When you find the trail and the prey, the challenge is just beginning. The bonzoon, meticulously crafted, becomes unreliable in the extreme cold. The string may break. The wooden shaft may become brittle. Your own hand, stiffened numb, struggles to draw the string in the smooth and precise way needed for a successful hunt. Usually, you will return empty-handed because you had expended precious energy and gained nothing in return except for the knowledge you have tried. These failures accumulated in mathematics of survival, becoming more and more desperate day by day. In winter, it gets dark early and the survival time of a day is thus prolonged. These nights are not filled with entertainment such as reading, music, or warm conversations around a sumptuous fireplace. These nights require endurance to keep your body as small as possible to retain any heat you manage to generate. That not for the kind of comfort we imagined. You gather together to survive. The bodies work close together, sharing warmth, just like a precious resource that had to be carefully allocated. Children sleep among adults. Their tiny bodies can absorb heat as well as heat. Their conversation was quiet and practical. If there is the first person to gird the fire scene, who will be on duty? How much food can be allocated tomorrow? Should anyone go hunting regardless of the weather? Is it wiser to save energy and expect better conditions? Sometimes there is no dialogue at all. Sometimes the cold requires complete concentration on breathing, enduring from one moment to the next, to the extent that speaking becomes an unnecessary luxury. Sleep is intermittent. It's not the kind of comfortable, deep, restorative sleep, but a light drowsiness that makes part of your consciousness alert to changes in temperature, to sounds that might indicate danger or opportunity, and to subtle changes in your physical condition which might signal the beginning of something serious. Frostbite and hypothermia can sometimes cause people to give up slowly in winter. You woke up repeatedly all night. Sometimes it's because the cold has found a new way to break through your defense. Sometimes it's because the position of your body has cut off the blood circulation. You must switch carefully and not disturb the subtle structure of shared warmth around you. Sometimes it is because the warm dreams of summer have given way to the dark reality of winter, and the contrast is too obvious to be ignored. The days become increasingly blurred, not marked by clocks or calendars, but by the subtle changes in light and weather, and by your body's adaptation to the continuous hardships. Your world shrinks to what's right in front of you. Keep it warm enough to think clearly, find enough food to maintain your strength, and store up sufficient energy to face the same challenges another day. You have learned to move in different ways, not with casual confidence in an easy season, but under the careful care of a person who knows that a sprained ankle, a soaked deer leather shoe, and a torn leather coat can all escalate into life-threatening problems. Every movement is carefully considered and every movement requires precious energy. Your body begins to change. Muscle tissue is converted into fuel through metabolism to maintain core temperature. The speed at which the hands and feet lose sensation is getting faster and faster. An unceasing hunger and thirst influences every thought, every decision and every moment of your pure consciousness of yours. But perhaps more challenging than physical difficulties is the psychological burden brought about by uncertainty. You have no idea how long this will last. You don't have a weather forecast or a seasonal calendar telling you on a specific date when spring will arrive. You only have hope, tradition, and the stories passed down by those elders who have experienced the terrifying winter. Some days, hope is real. The sun appeared very briefly, forming diamonds on the snow surface, reminding you that warmth still exists in the world. At other times, hope is like a luxury you can't afford. Survival has become a simple mechanical process. For the next moment, and the moment after, and the moment after. This is the rhythm of survival in winter. It is not a dramatic struggle against a single catastrophic event, but rather a quiet and enduring patience towards the conditions that test all aspects of human resilience. Day after day, night after night, breathe carefully. You are not a hero in this struggle. You are just an ordinary person. In this world that is increasingly indifferent to your existence, you have to use every skill, every piece of knowledge, and every bit of willpower to complete one task to survive. However, somehow morning still came. Somehow you keep waking up. For some reason you persisted, even though this possibility would discourage anyone with a luxurious choice. The cold teaches you some things that were never achievable when they were easier. You already know the exact difference between discomfort and danger. You have discovered a reserve of patience that you were unaware of. You have not only found the way to ignite the flame, but also the way to ignite hope, even though neither of them seems to last. This is the significance of getting through the winter without the technology that we take for granted today. This is the everyday reality that has shaped entire civilizations, which have created resilient cultures that enable people to thrive under conditions where our modern understanding of hardship pales in comparison. Winter is not merely a season to endure. This is a strict but honest teacher. When survival requires you to give everything, he reveals the true depth of human ability. When the first pale ray of sunlight of another winter morning shines through the smoke hole above, let's shift from your struggle to another one. A woman's name whispers an oral tradition, like the wind blowing through Greek corn stalks. The meaning of this name is a person who makes preparations. In the winter of 1447, in a longhouse settlement near what we now call Lake Ontario, this name proved to be prophetic in a way that no one could have foreseen. She woke up like you, with a clear consciousness that came from sleeping in the cold and would never completely disappear. But her awakening carries different weights and different responsibilities. Around her, the sleeping platforms lined along the walls of the house not only lay her own children, but also the large family that relied on her special talents. Measure the ability to prepare for winter to balance current demands and future uncertainties. This long house is nearly 60 feet long. Its bark covers the frames of four-related families. It aims at efficiency and warmth, representing the wisdom of several generations of architecture. However, even the best longhouses cannot generate heat out of thin air, cannot produce food from empty storage pits, and cannot exceed their natural limits in terms of supply. Old Zainiga stood up carefully. Her movements were very skillful and quiet. Having endured 42 winters, she has survived enough cold seasons to understand their rhythms, needs, and occasional kindness. As she moved in the familiar darkness, her breath formed small clouds, first checking her children, then the elders, then the reserves, which would determine whether spring would find them weak but still alive, or to pay the price for winter. This morning, just as every morning in the past month, her first task was to carefully calculate survival. How much corn is left in the storage pit under the floor of the long house? How much is dried pumpkin? How many portions of cured meat were hanging in the smoky darkness above the central fireplace? She didn't calculate it with abstract numbers but in days. So much food equals so many sunrises. This consumption rate is equal to the time before the store sells out. This problem has been bothering every winter leader. How long is it until spring? Singer's position in her community does not stem from her birth or marriage, but from the special combination of the memory, judgment and mathematical intuition that her people have learned to trust. Looking at the harvest, she could accurately know how it would be distributed in the coming months. While others focus their attention on collecting and dealing with the hunger in February, the despair in March, and the barren weeks when winter tightens before spring arrives, she not only calculated the ordinary winter, but also those harsh winters, those years when snow fell early or late, hunting failed, and storing food became the distinction between survival and tragedy. Harshest orage pit was dug deep in the soil beneath the long house, and rows of bark baskets represented more than just food. They represent the hope of organizing survival in an orderly manner and meticulously planning to transform the abundance of autumn into the lifeline of winter. But as winter, the one called the long winter in the family story, tested the work she had carefully prepared, it began to snow later in what should have been the hunting season. It is not the light snow that indicates the arrival of winter, but the continuous heavy snow that foretells the approaching of a season. The hunters were supposed to come back with the last batch of meat, but they returned empty-handed day after day because the weather made tracking impossible and the journey very dangerous. Then the cold came, not gradually intensifying as it usually does in winter, but all of a sudden, as if a door had slammed shut, bringing the warmth of autumn. Lakes that usually freeze slowly from the edge inward will solidify within a few days. The trees made a thunderous sound. The air seemed to have crystallized as well, carrying ice grains that pricked the exposed skin. OTCNIGI adjusted her calculation. She had originally planned to have a hard winter, but now she is preparing to face a disastrous one. The seemingly sufficient rations have been cut again and again. A meal that once provided a sense of satisfaction has turned into nearly a part that sustains life. The skills required to manage hunger in long-lived communities far exceed simple arithmetic. It requires an understanding of complex relationships, obligations and hierarchies, which not only determine who eats what, but also when and in what order. The elders always eat first. It's not because they consume the most. Their elderly bodies usually require less fuel than those who are still growing or working hard. However, because their survival carries the community's memories, stories, and the accumulated wisdom about enduring these tests, the children follow closely behind. But here, Alt Tanaga is confronted with heart-wrenching calculations. A growing body requires more food, but it is also more resilient and more likely to survive temporary scarcity. How much of the child's share can she reduce before causing permanent damage? How much can she reserve for those adults who need physical strength to hunt and gather firewood to maintain the basic functions of group survival? Hunters are given priority during activities. Extra rations, acknowledging the energy they expend while trekking through the snow in search of prey, which becomes increasingly scarce every week. However, when the daily search turns out to be in vain and the effort spent on the search yields no return, their share will decrease to match their contribution. Pregnant women, breastfeeding mothers, patients, and injured individuals all have their own moral and practical balance. When one person is saved, the other is doomed. Protecting the strong may sacrifice the weak. Protecting the weak might weaken the strong, leaving them unable to support anyone. When Otanaga made these choices, she held the weight of life in her hands and followed the tradition of winter survivors passed down from generation to generation. But in the end, she made a specific decision all by herself that no tradition could have foreseen. By the time heavy snow had been falling for 6 consecutive weeks, even the most pessimistic estimate of the OTCG proved to be optimistic. The stored corn was processed into various forms, ground into flour, cooked into thin porridge, mixed with water, and any prey that could be found was far less than expected. Dried and carefully preserved pumpkins offer sweetness and vitamins which can prevent scurvy, but they provide almost no lasting nutrition. The dried meat was spread out into a broth, so thin that it hardly stained the water, but it still couldn't satisfy the hunger of everyone in this house. It was precisely during this period that Odin's true talent was revealed. Not only should one have the ability to manage abundance, but also the creativity to find solace in places where others only see emptiness. She taught young women to scrape off the inner bark of the basswood tree and process it into flowers that could extend the supply of corn. She taught them how to dig out rosa hips still stuck to winter branches in the snow and how to find cashnuts buried underground by squirrels but forgotten. What is even more challenging is that despite growing despair, she still made social adjustments that enabled the community to function. When there were disputes over food distribution, her quiet authority resolved these issues. When individuals hoard private goods, her gentle yet firm intervention ensures that the resources remain public. When despair threatens to undermine the collective will to survive, her able presence reminds everyone that spring always returns before and will come again. But perhaps her most difficult innovation was inventing the festival at the height of the famine. Every week she would gather the entire Longhouse community together to celebrate what she called endurance. The food was no more abundant than on any previous day. But its presentation methods, sharing methods and experience methods are different. People no longer starved in isolation but gathered in a circle. People were telling stories and singing softly, and small amounts of food were distributed in a ritual and grateful way. These foods do not provide more calories, but they offer the same essential things. The feeling of them living together, their personal struggles being part of their joint efforts, has a significance that transcends mere existence. Leadership in times of abundance is one thing. Leadership during periods of scarcity fully demonstrates different qualities. As the long winter deepened, where Sun found himself making some decisions that would have been unimaginable during the relatively easy times. When her elderly grandmother, Kani Nki, began to show signs of what we might now consider severe malnutrition, Otsain Eager quietly increased her food intake by reducing her own. When the young Tiki-Tok kept coughing and it might get worse, Ottanaga organized a rotation system to ensure that the girl always slept in the warmest place in the long house, surrounded by the strongest people. However, when the hunter Rowanio's self-esteem was hurt during several weeks of failed expeditions, he began to stockpile some of his rations and claimed that they were insufficient. Otsainiga is facing another challenge. Directly confronting him might undermine the social cohesion that sustains this group. Ignoring his behavior might encourage others to follow his example. Her solution demonstrated her intelligence and talent, which made her an effective leader. She started a new approach, asking everyone to share their most successful hunting story when distributing dinner. Night after night she encouraged everyone to tell stories of wealth, of rewards for skills, and of contributions to the welfare of the community. Rowanio found that the stories around him not only sang of success, but also of generosity, and thus he gradually began to tell his own story. When telling the stories of these wonderful times, he recalled himself when life was easy. His hoarding stopped without any direct confrontation. His pride shifted from the selfishness of self-minus defense to the protection of the community, which valued his skills, even if they could not overcome impossible conditions. By the middle term, Ottanaga's calculations had shifted from food supply to more abstract but equally important resources. How much hope does this community still have? How long can people endure more and more difficulties without losing the will to carry on? What is the balance between honestly acknowledging their situation and the optimism necessary for survival? She began to understand that her role was not only to manage material resources, but also emotional and spiritual ones. The stories told at dinner became more carefully selected. These stories tell of past survival, of seemingly endless winters that eventually ushered in spring, and of ancestors who endured similar trials and gained deeper wisdom. She rationed despair as carefully as food. When individuals show signs of giving up, she discovers those tasks that they find useful and those that remind them of their contributions to the team's value. When team morale was low, she shared some small pieces of good news. One day, the wind died down and traces were found near the longhouse, which indicated that there might be prey in the area again. But she also limited false optimism. He never promised that rescue was coming and never hinted that their situation was better than it actually was. On the contrary, she offers something more sustainable: the quiet confidence, skills, knowledge and collective strength that possess enable them to endure any demands of winter. As winter began to loosen slowly and almost imperceptibly, Otcniga was facing what might be her most difficult period. The reserve supplies have almost been exhausted. This community survived for several weeks relying on determination and intelligence, but its body became thin and its energy reserves were exhausted. At this time, winter takes its life, not in the early violent storms, but in the slow consumption at the end of the season. At this time, survival requires the resources that were consumed several months ago. However, it was also at this time that her meticulous management began to pay off, not just a simple calorie count. Every morning, the community that emerged from the longhouse was weakened, but remained intact. The relationship is tense but not broken. The social structure that united them has withstood the test but has not been torn apart. Those children who had learned to find satisfaction in small portions of food had also learned how to adapt, which will play a role for the rest of their lives. Those adults who discovered the patience they had never realized they had grew up in ways that abundance had never taught them. When the first crows returned, when the first ice began to crack along the lakeside, and when the first sprouts appeared on the maple branches, the community that witnessed these signs was no longer the one that entered winter a few months ago. They are transformed by hardship, refined by scarcity, and united by common patience. Under Osinga's leadership, they not only survived physically but also, as a united group, their connection was strengthened rather than weakened during this ordeal. feeling both sudden and slow. Suddenly, because after several months of uniformity, change seemed to occur all of a sudden. Flowing water, returning birds, and newly sprouted buds passed through the soft soil. Gradually, because the body weakened by winter cannot immediately embrace abundance and cannot suddenly shift from a protective mode to a celebratory one. The final challenge for the odds as a winter manager is to supervise the transition back to sufficiency. Stomach cannot handle a big meal. A body that has adapted to nutritional deficiency needs time to readjust to adequate nutrition. Conservative psychological habits have to gradually give way to newer mindsets. But perhaps more importantly, she must help the community understand the achievements they have made. They didn't just survive. They demonstrated human adaptability, cooperation ability, and mutual care ability under various conditions, which tested all the assumptions that people could tolerate. In the years to come, stories about the long winter will no longer focus on pain or deprivation. They will praise the ingenuity of finding food in places where it seems there is no food, the spirit of cooperation in sharing scarce resources fairly, and the leadership that guides them through the darkness without losing hope. Otoshi Niga herself will not be remembered by people because she is not a heroic figure and creates miracles, but someone who understands the profound mathematics of survival. It's not just about calculating calories and days, but more complex calculations, balancing personal needs and collective welfare, current comfort and future safety, honest assessment and necessary optimism. She learned through her own examples that survival is not merely about having sufficient resources, but about making wise, efficient and diligent use of any available resources. Leadership in a crisis not only means making difficult decisions, but also maintaining the community's ability to remain human even under un-human conditions when making these decisions. As spring arrived, the memories of the worst moments of winter began to soften. Aunt Seneca could look around her longhouse, seeing increasingly thin, but not painful faces, seeing relationships that had been tested but not broken, and seeing a community that had discovered a reserve of strength they had never realized they had. Winter came to an end as usual, but they didn't just wait for it to pass. They met it with wisdom, cooperation, and quiet courage. They faced the worst things the world could offer, found a way to survive, and maintained their complete humanity in the process. In the gentle warmth of late spring, as abundance gradually returned, harsh memories began to fade away. Odingar realized that they had accomplished something more than just survival. They'd proved to themselves and generations who heard their stories that as long as there is wisdom and care, human beings can endure almost anything. The long winter has passed, but as long as people remember the calm power of a woman, not only to count days and rations, but also how to count hope itself, she will carefully divide it into portions that last exactly the time they need, and its lessons will continue. As we leave the longhouse in Totek Seneca, away from the private details of a woman's struggle against a long winter, let's step into a different kind of cold, an uncertain cool shadow that shrouds many things we thought we knew about surviving in the unturned American winter. Imagine, if you wish, an archaeologist working in the gentle morning sunlight, carefully dusting off the artifacts that have waited for centuries to tell their stories. The tools were clearly visible, such as scrapers, bone needles, and pottery shards, all of which vividly reflected daily life. Each divine artifact represents a specific moment, when human hands shaped stones or carved bones for a particular purpose. The figures of the summer camp emerged from the rocks and fish-bone deposits that had been cracked by fire. The ruins of autumn revealed grinding stones still covered with acorn powder. The storage pits that once held winter grains, carefully organized for seasonal abundance. But when winter became the focus of attention and researchers sought evidence of how humans survived the cruel years we have been exploring, the archaeological record became mysteriously silent. The scenery is becoming increasingly sparse. Handicrafts are getting rarer and rarer, and the clear narrative threads interwoven with other seasons have vanished in a disheartening void and uncertainty. Why is it like this? Why can we precisely reconstruct summer fishing techniques and precisely understand our structure and the weight of our fishing nets? By tracking the autumn harvest patterns through preserved seeds and processing tools, complex scheduling and resource management are revealed. But when we try to understand the specific technologies that enabled humans to thrive in winter, we find ourselves caught in the shadows. And these technologies might defeat us today. The answer partly lies in the essence of survival in winter. The most effective technologies are often the most ephemeral. The materials used in the design could be completely biodegradable, and the structure can melt as the spring returns. Knowledge exists in the hands and in the heart, not in objects that can be preserved underground for centuries. The effectiveness of these solutions lies in their integration with natural processes and in their ability to cooperate with rather than confront the forces that threaten survival. Apart from a brief impression that vanished with the next warming, the snow left no archaeological traces. Breathing leaves no fossil record, although it may be the most important of all resources. The warm exhalation creates a microclimate within the shelter. Be careful to control your breathing to prevent hypothermia. The shared breathing kept the baby alive on the coldest night. The wisdom of patience and endurance will not create artifacts for future generations to study and appreciate. It only leaves the ultimate proof of its effectiveness. That is, survival itself. Think of those shelters that protected our ancestors in the cold. We know of their existence. There is no doubt that survival itself proves their effectiveness. Thousands upon thousands of people have endured thousands of winters, and generation after generation of climates often reached temperatures that we consider fatal. The mathematics of survival demands that these shelters not only be sufficient, but also have complex architectural solutions to address complex issues such as insulation, ventilation, structural integrity, and resource efficiency. But what exactly do they look like? How were they built? What innovation enables them to retain heat, while providing sufficient portability for communities in need of migration when prey is scarce or fuel supplies are reduced? What engineering principles do their designs follow? How do they adapt to different terrains, different groups' sizes, and constantly changing weather conditions? A few surviving descriptions in the early ethnographic records suggest that the architectural solution was so elegant that it seemed almost magical. Buildings constructed by snow itself can insulate against elements that threaten life. The physical principle behind this achievement is hard to imagine. It uses ice crystals to create thermal barriers. Understand the performance of different types of snow under loam to know exactly how to shape the entrance, create the airlock, while maintaining the integrity of the structure. These shelters take advantage of the thermal properties of the earth by digging holes on hillsides to search for the heat stored on the earth. These are not merely holes on the ground, but carefully designed excavations to balance insulation and drainage. Understanding soil composition and groundwater patterns can predict the performance of different types of soil in the freezing cycle. The knowledge required to accurately locate these shelters to obtain the best solar energy while protecting them from prevailing winds represents a complex understanding of microclimates, which modern architects strive to achieve with advanced tools. LeanTOS can capture and redirect the wind instead of simply opposing it. These structures operate in a fluid dynamics manner, demonstrating a profound understanding of how air moves on different surfaces. How to generate a pressure difference to draw smoke out of the living space while drawing in warm air. The angle is not arbitrary. They represent precise calculations of wind patterns, then the behavior of hot gas masses under different atmospheric conditions. However, these records were written by outsiders, usually decades or centuries after the technologies they described had been abandoned or modified through contact with European technologies. To explain the innovations of another culture through its own conceptual framework, these descriptions carry a peculiar distortion. European observers have brought hypotheses about architecture, the relationship between residence and security, and the essence of human habitation, all of which add color to what they have recorded. Furthermore, these extended observers usually encounter winter shelters during their brief visits, and the forms of these shelters are often already influenced by trade goods and the constantly changing environment. We seldom witness the complete seasonal cycle of construction, use and disposal, and this will reveal the full complexity of these systems. Their descriptions focus on obvious features while neglecting the subtle innovations that determine life and death. What is left to us is a glimpse of alluring knowledge systems that are so complex that they can enable people to survive under conditions that modern survival experts consider fatal. Today's mountaineering experts, equipped with space-age materials and emergency communication devices, sometimes disrupt the regular winter weather of countless generations of Indians. Despite our various technological advantages, the gap in their survival capabilities compared to ours indicates that their knowledge systems are astonishingly complex. However, the specific details, the precise angles for optimizing insulation performance, the material combinations that provide maximum insulation with the least weight, and the engineering principles that govern structural decisions remain elusive, lost in the gap between what is effective and what can be preserved in archaeological sediments. Knowledge is clearly there, and the results prove this point, but the way it spreads is so different from our own record-keeping system that it is even difficult for us to recognize its complexity. Imagine that the snow shed is both heat-insulating and well-ventilated, capable of blocking the wind and allowing dangerous carbon monoxide to escape from the heated fire. The engineering challenge represented by this is significant. Creating a sealed and cold-proof structure while maintaining the safe air circulation can be quickly constructed in emergency situations when combined with a complex ventilation system to prevent suffocation and heat loss. Think about how much mathematical precision is needed to precisely calculate the thickness of the ice wall to ensure the integrity of the structure without delivering fatal cold energy inward. This is not a guess. People's lives depend on precise calculations. This knowledge must take into account different types of ice, different atmospheric conditions, the thermal properties of different insulating materials, and the heat output of different fuel sources. None of these are improvisations out of despair. They are techniques refined through the trials and errors of several generations, passed down through practical teaching, without leaving any written records, blueprints or instruction manuals for future archaeologists to discover. The technology inherited by each generation has undergone ultimate choice pressure, life and death tests, and has been proved and effective enough to ensure survival under the most challenging conditions in North America. When we take into account the changes that must exist, complexity becomes even more obvious. Different regions face different challenges. Coastal areas should respond to marine weather patterns and salt vapor corrosion. Mountainous areas need to address the issues of altitude and extreme temperature changes. Grassland communities need portability and wind resistance. Forest residents can make use of abundant timber, but they face different challenges in fuel management. Every region, every community, and perhaps every extended family has made specialized adjustments to these basic technologies to adapt to their specific environmental niches. The knowledge system is not only complex. They are very flexible and can quickly adapt to environmental changes as the community migrates and available resources evolve. Perhaps more mysterious than building shelters is the technology used for personal insulation. From the existing examples, we know that the Indians created a very complex clothing system which was layered, well-fitting, and adapted to specific climatic conditions and activity requirements. However, the archaeological record only retains some fragments partially demonstrating the comprehensive techniques for maintaining body temperature under extreme conditions. The principles involved have been clearly put forward. Modern outdoor equipment manufacturers spend millions of dollars researching insulation systems, which were developed by the Indians merely through careful observation and experimentation. Today's best cold-weather clothing combines layering systems, moisture management, wind resistance and triangulation principles, all of which were unearthed by local communities centuries before the scientific revolution. Consider the materials mentioned in historical records. These organic insulators are revolutionary in their effectiveness, creating dead air spaces that prevent heat loss while allowing moisture transfer and preventing the dangerous accumulation of sweat and condensation. For instance, Xiongpu velvet has insulating properties comparable to those of modern synthetic films, but it has advantages that no artificial material can match. It is completely biodegradable, locally sourced, renewable, and does not require industrial processing. However, harvesting, preparing, and integrating captar into the clothing system require mastering seasonal arrangements, processing techniques, storage methods, and construction skills, which modern textile experts have only just begun to understand. The performance of these organic insulators will be revolutionary. However, they completely decomposed without leaving any trace for modern researchers to analyze. We can inspect the surviving clothes made of more durable materials. But the most complex insulation systems, those that determine survival at death in extreme cold, have vanished without a trace, taking away their secret. Among the traditions passed down by word of mouth, there is a kind of clothing that has almost no weight, but can keep people warm in today's temperatures where thick down coats are needed. These descriptions describe such precisely fitted and efficiently designed clothing that offers the greatest insulation in the smallest volume, allowing for free hunting, traveling, and daily activities even in extreme conditions. Describing shoes that can be worn in snow for several hours without the wearer's feet hitting cold or wet reveals an understanding of thermodynamics, water management, and bioefficiencies which modern boot manufacturers strive to achieve. These are not simple deer leather shoes, but complex systems that may include multiple layers, specialized insulating materials, and innovative designs to prevent heat loss and moisture infiltration, while maintaining the peripheral visual and auditory acuity required for hunting to a certain extent. The headwear that can also shield from the wind provides a solution to complex design challenges. How do you protect yourself from the cold wind while maintaining the sensory awareness needed for hunting? How can we maintain thermal protection for the most sensitive parts of the human body while preventing the formation of frost, which could hinder vision? But how exactly are these materials processed? What technology transforms raw plant and animal materials into an insulating system that rivals any material produced by modern technology? Its effectiveness has been proven through countless harsh winters. However, the specific process is still locked in the past and can only be understood through scattered clues and well-grounded speculations. The processing of organic insulating materials itself represents an important professional knowledge system. Understand when to harvest what plants, how to prepare fibers to achieve maximum fluff, innocent durability, and how to clean and process animal fur to maintain its insulation performance while making it suitable for clothing structures. Each step of these processes may involve technologies improved over generations, specific methods to remove grease without damaging the fiber structure, drying methods to maintain the insulation performance of materials, and storage techniques to prevent deterioration while maintaining usability. This knowledge will be passed down through the apprenticeship system to ensure quality control while allowing for innovation and improvement. Some indigenous communities have well preserved these techniques during historical periods. The contact of Europeans often undermines the dissemination of traditional knowledge. Trade goods, metal tools, and artificial clothing offer alternative solutions, which are sometimes more convenient, but often not very suitable for specific environmental challenges. This disruption is not merely a matter of new materials replacing old ones. European trade commodities bring about diverse maintenance requirements, different performance characteristics, and different relationships with environmental conditions. Wool blankets may be more accessible than the materials of traditional clothing systems, but they cannot offer the same precise thermal regulation, the same humidity management, or the same integration with other survival technologies. In addition, traded goods often require different supporting knowledge systems. Traditional clothing is part of an integrated survival strategy, which includes specific hunting techniques, resource management practices, and seasonal scheduling patterns. When the clothing system changes, the approach to survival throughout the winter often has to be modified or abandoned. When ethnologists began to systematically document traditional techniques, many of the most complex winter survival techniques had already been modified or abandoned. Those that survive are often simplified versions that adapt to new materials and constantly changing environments, bearing only the echoes of original innovation. Therefore, Ethnographic records present us with a paradox. Detailed descriptions of obviously effective techniques, but these descriptions may not represent the full complexity of the original system. We view winter survival techniques from the perspective of cultural destruction, observing those systems that had adapted to new environments, new materials, and new challenges. This means that even our best historical materials may not be able to capture all the complexity of survival knowledge before the winter. Documented technologies are those that can adapt to new environments, can be explained to external observers, and can survive cultural destruction. The most professional, precise calibration and environmentally friendly technologies may disappear before someone even thinks of recording them. Perhaps the most mysterious hint is that winter survival involves not only physical techniques, but also carefully designed mental and psychological systems that aim to maintain mental health and social cohesion under months of extreme stress. The challenge of surviving in winter is not merely physical. This is a profound psychological issue that requires techniques to deal with isolation, depression, interpersonal conflicts, and various forms of mental breakdowns that may be triggered by extreme conditions. Fire protection maintenance. The underground passage was carefully constructed in the autumn when the soil was still usable, allowing cold air to preheat before entering the main living spaces. These are not simple tunnels but engineering systems that take advantage of the Earth's natural thermal characteristics. They draw in air through underground passages, where the air absorbs heat from deep soil maintained above freezing point, even if the surface temperature can kill a person exposed underground within a few hours. The heat generated by the cooking fire is transferred through the stone and clay systems, which still emit heat long after the flame goes out. The thermal mass system stores heat energy during active cooking and gradually releases it throughout the night, ensuring that the sleeping area remains comfortable even when the fire is allowed to burn low to save fuel. These systems represent a complex understanding of thermodynamics, and this knowledge was be accumulated through experiments and improvements over several generations. The location of the sleeping area takes advantage of natural thermal patterns, reserving the warmest place for the most important family members. But this is not an arbitrary privilege. It reflects an understanding of how heat spreads in confined spaces, how to maintain body temperature most effectively, and how social hierarchy aligns with physical comfort to meet the needs of personal welfare and community leadership. What's more complicated is the ventilation system, which can ignite a big fire without the problems of smoke and carbon monoxide, and these issues limit the heating options for ordinary families. These are not simple swelled exhaust holes but designed airways that can generate appropriate airflow patterns to ensure the effective circulation of heated air, while safely discharging hazardous gases. This project requires an understanding of air pressure, wind patterns, and complex combustion physics, which may imply the difference between comfortable warmth and fatal suffocation. The floor is integrated with a drainage system, preventing the dampness problem that plagues simple houses. The elevated platforms and passageways ensure that melting snow and condensation from breathing and cooking do not create an damp environment, which could lead to hypothermia or respiratory diseases. In winter, humidity control becomes as important as temperature control. Dampness can be as fatal as cold, causing the human body to lose heat faster than it generates it. There, respiratory infections can develop into fatal diseases, and treatment resources are often unavailable in winter. These innovations are not achievable by anyone. They need a coordinated workforce, professional knowledge, and materials collected and processed several months in advance. They represent collective investment in the comfort of specific individuals. Community resources are used to ensure that some people's winter experiences are completely different from those of others. The complex comfort system in elite families requires resource allocation decisions for the entire community, prioritizing the welfare of certain families rather than the broader equality of winter experiences. In communities where survival often requires cooperation and resource sharing, how do such differences develop and persist? The answer lies in understanding that winter is not only a difficult season, but also a time when the social hierarchy becomes more necessary and more obvious. When theoretical equality that may represent a bountiful season gives way to actual inequality that determines who lives and who dies. During the harvest season, The leadership may be relatively equal, making decisions through consensus and a rather extensive allocation of resources. At the summer conference, every adult's voice carries weight. At the autumn assembly, the community makes decisions through long discussions and negotiations. But winter creates a different kind of power, when survival depends on careful planning, resource allocation, but sometimes even life and death decisions about rationing. Communities often find that concentrating power in the hands of individuals with reliable judgment and experience is effective. Ted Darrow's privileges were not simply inherited or arbitrarily allocated. They are part of the compensation for the responsibilities that ordinary community members are reluctant to take on. When a child is ill, he must decide which families can receive additional rations. When resources are less than expected, he must decide which families should make more contributions to the welfare of the community. When the supply of stored food was insufficient, he had to decide who would be sent on dangerous winter hunting expeditions. During the weeks when the cold and material shortages were at their worst, as tensions intensified, he mediated disputes over resource allocation. When family members blame each other for hoarding, that an individual suspects that their neighbor's consumption has exceeded their due share. When the social cooperation that keeps winter alive begins to disintegrate under the pressure of real difficulties. At these moments, centralized power is crucial for the survival of the community. When a person has to make decisions that affect others' lives without the luxury of prolonging negotiations or building consensus. In winter, his longhouse acts like a community center where important decisions are made, disputes are resolved, and plans for spring activities are made. The comfort and abundance maintained there are not only personal luxuries, but also an investment in leadership, ensuring that those who make key decisions have the necessary physical and mental resources to make them well. Those leaders who have become weak due to malnutrition or personal survival problems cannot provide the kind of clear-thinking, undecisive action that is oft unneeded in winter crises. However, this system also creates a feedback loop, reinforcing privileges across generations. Children who grow up in warm and well-nourished families are more likely to develop the physical and intellectual abilities that make them effective leaders. There is no underdeveloped body due to malnutrition in childhood. Those brains that have not been damaged by the stress and distraction of long-term hunger. Their personalities are shaped by a sense of security rather than scarcity. These advantages accumulate throughout one's life and create leadership skills, seemingly justifying the continuation of privileges. Families with abundant resources can devote more time to education, skills development, and the building of interpersonal relationships, thereby enhancing their social status. Ordinary families focus their energy on immediate survival needs, while elite families can invest the long-term investments, developing expertise in weather forecasting, resource management, diplomatic negotiations, and spiritual practices, making them increasingly indispensable to community welfare. Winter elite is not just about consuming more resources. As they utilize their privileged positions to develop knowledge and skills, providing reasons for the continued privilege, they become custodians of complex information such as weather patterns, resource management, and social coordination, which makes them increasingly indispensable to the survival of the community. This kind of knowledge is not merely genetic wisdom, but constantly evolving professional knowledge, which requires leisure time and mental energy and can only be provided in a safe environment. Perhaps there is no place that better reflects the contrast between the elite and the ordinary winter experience than the practice of the middle feast. Ordinary families, on the other hand, carefully implement rationing, using precise mathematical calculations to determine the daily portion. This might mean the difference of surviving until spring, or it could mean dying in the last few weeks before food supplies are fully restored. Even in the toughest months, elite families have the ability to maintain true affluence. These are not merely excessive displays but complex social technologies with multiple functions. During the darkest months, the midwinter feast brings together scattered community members, providing social connections and helping to prevent isolation and despair that could be as fatal as cold or hunger. During the most difficult time of the year, community gatherings, joint celebrations, and collective assurances that survival is possible and that spring will eventually return bring psychological benefits. None of these are luxuries but fundamental elements of community resilience, which require a significant investment of resources to maintain. For the elite class, holding such events demonstrates their ability to effectively manage resources and their capacity to continuously provide community welfare under challenging conditions. But this demonstration was in line with both political and practical purposes. In the winter, when minor mistakes in resource management or decision making can lead to disastrous consequences, the community needs to have confidence in its leadership. The abundance in the depth of winter provides solid evidence that leaders possess the necessary resources and judgment to guide the community through the most vulnerable season. For ordinary community members, festivals not only offer rare abundance, but also convince them that survival is possible, spring will come, and their sacrifices and hardships have a greater purpose. In the extremely scarce winter, the psychological impact of sharing a feast cannot be simply measured by the calories consumed. Instead, in a season when individual despair may undermine community cooperation, hope is maintained, social bonds are strengthened, and the commitment to collective coexistence is renewed. The preparations for these banquets reveal other aspects of elite privilege. While ordinary families focus their autumn efforts on basic survival preparations, elite families can allocate their labor to more complex food processing and preservation technologies, which can create delicious dishes rather than simple food. The difference lies not only in quantity, but also in quality. In a process of food preparation, it can not only maintain or enhance the nutritional value, but also create the taste and texture, making winter meals truly satisfying, rather than merely sustaining life. They retained the knowledge and resources needed to brew fermented beverages. During the most difficult months, fermented beverages not only provided calories but also brought psychological benefits. Alcoholic beverages can relieve the psychological stress of winter confinement, promote social connections during community gatherings, offer warmth and comfort, and help people endure conditions that test various aspects of human adaptability. However, brewing requires surplus grains, specialized equipment, controllable temperature conditions, and knowledge of making significant investments in community resources in non-minus survival activities. The way they preserve food is to enhance rather than simply maintain its nutritional value, creating truly satisfying winter food. Not just enough. Smoking, drying, fermentation, and storage techniques require professional knowledge, equipment, and materials, which are beyond the reach of ordinary families. The difference between elite and ordinary winter diets lies not only in abundance and scarcity, but also in the nutrition optimized for maintaining health and energy versus merely the nutrients needed for survival. But perhaps most importantly, they maintain the social networks that make such abundance possible. Elite families do not merely consume their own resources. They coordinate resource sharing among multiple families, manage complex obligations on reciprocal systems, and duct a community wealth in a way that benefits everyone, but the ones who benefit the most are the coordinators. These are not simple economic relations but complex social systems that require diplomatic skills, record minus keeping abilities, and long minus term relationship management. This represents professional labor that demands a great deal of time and intellectual investment. Winter is not only a season for the body to survive, but also a period when culture itself is maintained and spread. The long nights offer an opportunity to tell stories, share knowledge and values which have united generations of the community. But here, the elite status also creates different experiences and opportunities, strengthens the existing social hierarchy, and at the same time provides genuine community benefits. In Tad Doro's longhouse on winter nights, not only basic survival activities were carried out, but also complex cultural work. Elders who had accumulated decades of knowledge share their understanding of historical, political, and spiritual issues with younger family members who will eventually take on leadership role. This is not a casual conversation, but a systematic education that requires leisure time, physical comfort, and intelligence. Families that focus on basic survival simply cannot spare the time. These are not casual conversations but systematic education that requires leisure time, physical comfort and intelligence. Families that focus on basic survival simply cannot spare the time. Elite children not only learn practical skills, but also acquire the complex social and political knowledge required for community leadership. The education they have received goes far beyond basic survival skills, including a complex understanding of human nature, social dynamics, conflict resolution, as well as the subtle art of persuasion and negotiation required for effective leadership. They remembered the family trees from several generations ago and learned about the intricate relationships and obligations among different families and clans. This kind of genealogical knowledge is not abstract information but practical wisdom. It makes complex political operations, understanding of alliance systems, and navigating through complex social networks that determine how resources are allocated and decisions are made during times of crisis possible. They studied the precedents and agreements of management decisions during crises, understanding the delicate negotiations needed to maintain community cohesion in times of scarce resources and irritability. Leadership education encompasses understanding human psychology under pressure, skills for managing group dynamics in life-and-death situations, and strategies for making life-and-death decisions that community members would accept and support, even if these decisions require significant personal sacrifices. Most importantly, they have learned the art of leadership itself, how to make decisions that affect others' lives, how to balance competing interests, and how to respond to community needs while maintaining authority. This kind of education is carried out in winter because winter provides both time and space for such learning. However, only those families whose basic survival needs are fully guaranteed are likely to invest in long-term development. The stories told in elite families are not merely for entertainment. They are also a treasure trove of knowledge covering everything from weather forecasting to resource management and conflict resolution. They retained their accumulated wisdom, enabling complex governance to be achieved, but the forms they retained were mainly accessible to those who already held privileged positions. Cultural knowledge has become another dimension of the elite advantage, creating information asymmetry, strengthening the existing power structure, and at the same time providing real benefits for community welfare. Elite families orally preserve technical knowledge in agriculture, hunting, medicine and environmental management, which represents the professional expertise accumulated over several generations. This knowledge not only requires memorization but also profound understanding, and profound understanding can only be developed through long-term study and practical experience. The leisure time required for this kind of education is in itself a privilege, which creates a gap in professional knowledge between the elite and ordinary community members. But during the crisis, the knowledge preserved by elite families also serves the broader interests of the community. The wisdom accumulated in the leading family becomes a community resource. Understand historical precedents for managing specific types of disasters, understand environmental patterns that can predict weather changes or resource availability, and understand diplomatic expertise that can resolve conflicts with neighboring communities. These capabilities demonstrate the practical value of elite privileges for the survival of the community. However, those who only see abundance and comfort often fail to see the cost of winter privileges. Elite status means taking responsibility for decisions that determine the life and death of community members. When resources are insufficient, leaders like Tadaho must choose which families will receive additional support and which ones will have to endure greater difficulties. These decisions carry moral weight and cannot be alleviated by abundance. These decisions have brought about a psychological burden that abundance cannot alleviate. You know that your choice of resource allocation might leave someone's child hungry. Your judgment on the duration of the winter might put a family that trusts your leadership in a difficult situation. And your management of community resources could have life-and-death consequences for dozens or even hundreds of people. Elite leaders know that their mistakes may cause consequences far beyond personal difficulties. Such wrong judgments or inadequate planning may lead to the death of community members from hunger, sun exposure or violence that sometimes breaks out when survival resources are insufficient. During the most intense period of the annual cycle, responsibility expands from resource allocation to social management. Winter brings communities into hunt spaces where personality conflicts may escalate into violence, and where the psychological pressure of confinement and scarcity may undermine the social cooperation necessary for survival. Elite leaders must manage these dynamics while maintaining their own psychological balance, mediating disputes that could be life and death, and projecting the confidence and stability that community members need to keep hope alive during the darkest months. Elite families also face a wide variety of physical risks. Their longhouses are larger and more exquisite and require more maintenance in extreme weather. When snowstorms destroy buildings that shelter multiple families, elite leaders often have to venture into dangerous environments, coordinate repair work, organize community labor for emergency construction, and decide on resource allocation when survival infrastructure is threatened. Their duties often require traveling under dangerous conditions, exposed to cold and fatigue, and their privileged status cannot fully alleviate these. Diplomatic missions negotiate resource sharing with neighboring communities. When hunting and exploring, store food to prove food shortage, and coordinate emergency travel with the community to deal with crises. These activities require elite leaders to risk their lives, and their comfortable longhouses cannot stop them. But perhaps most importantly, their elite status makes them targets of attack during the most desperate moments of winter. When community members are starving while the leading family is relatively comfortable, tensions may escalate into violence. The privileges of the elite always depend on the acceptance of the community, and winter tests these relationships under the most stressful conditions. Those leaders who make unpopular decisions in resource allocation, those who seem to benefit too much from their privileged positions during times of widespread hardship, and those who fail to show sufficient concern for community welfare. These people may find that their comfortable winter homes have become the targets of community frustration and despair. Ted Aide and others like him know that if community support is eroded, their comfortable winter homes could turn into prisons, and if social order collapses under the pressure of extreme hardship, the wealth they have accumulated could make them victims rather than leaders. Elite privileges require constant negotiation and defense, and it is necessary to constantly prove that concentrated resources serve the interests of the community rather than merely personal interest. By studying the winter experiences of the elites, we can gain a more complex understanding of how leadership and privilege function in unconnected indigenous communities. This is not a simple hierarchical society, as some people have a permanent advantage over others. On the contrary, they are seasonal democratic countries where leadership roles and resource access change in response to evolving community needs and environmental challenges. In summer and autumn, when resources are abundant and survival challenges are manageable, leadership may be relatively informal and equal. Emphasize the decision-making process of building consensus. Give priority to a broad and fair resource allocation system. Reduce permanent hierarchical social relations, and support situational authority based on professional knowledge and the environment. Then rich and favorable seasons enable the community to maintain a social system that prioritizes equality and collective decision-making. But winter requires different social skills. Power centralization, resource skill ordination and decision-making systems can function rapidly and effectively under crisis conditions. The speed and decisiveness required to manage winter emergencies often conflict with a deliberation process characterized by a more egalitarian governance system, as taking immediate action may mean a difference between community survival and disaster, rather than merely a social preference. The winter privilege of the elites is not merely a personal advantage, but also an investment in leadership during the season when effective leadership is crucial to the survival and collapse of the community. The abundance maintained by elite families is not merely about consumption, but rather a strategic reserve that can be used for community welfare when the environment demands it. The complex comfort system unique to the elite winter camp is not only a luxury, but also the infrastructure for maintaining leadership during a period when leadership is crucial to the survival of the community. However, this system also creates reasonable tensions between efficiency and fairness, as well as between the actual interests of centralized leadership and the human costs of systemic inequality. These tensions manifest differently in various communities. Some communities have developed more equal approaches, while others maintain stricter hierarchical structures. The balance between seasonal demand and social justice remains an ongoing challenge, and communities must navigate according to their own values, environment, and historical experience. Understanding these dynamics helps explain the resilience and vulnerability of indigenous communities before they were conquered. The social system that enables people to survive under extreme conditions has also caused internal divisions, and such divisions may be exploited by external pressure. When traditional models are colonized and disrupted by cultural changes, these advantages may turn into weaknesses. When external forces challenge established social models, the winter privileges of the elites that serve the survival of the community under traditional conditions may become a source of vulnerability. As winter gives way to spring, the relationship between elite privileges and community welfare is facing an annual settlement. How effective is centralized leadership in serving the needs of the community? How fair was the allocation of resources during the months of material shortage? Which families have sacrificed the most and which have benefited the most from the social arrangements that govern winter survival? For a leader like Ted Ho, the arrival of spring brings both relief and evaluation. Communities that have survived the winter intact can celebrate successful leadership. However, communities that have suffered significant losses may question the decisions on resource allocation but are characteristic of cold months. The effectiveness of elite privileges should not only be measured by the comfort of the leading family, but also by the survival rate of the community, the efficiency of resource management, and the maintenance of social cooperation during the most challenging periods of the annual cycle. When traditional activities resumed, elite families that maintained prosperity while others endured real difficulties faced complex social negotiations. What was regarded as a necessary privilege during times of crisis seems less reasonable when survival is no longer a problem. At the spring meeting, community members can express their assessment of winter leadership, where resource allocation decisions can be reviewed and evaluated, and where the social contract that grants privileges to the elite during the winter to be renegotiated in the following year. But spring also reveals the benefits of maintaining elite privileges in winter. Leaders who maintain health and energy during the cold months are more capable of organizing spring activities, planning and coordinating labor, managing complex social and economic activities, and preparing the community for the next seasonal cycle. Investment in leadership during the winter has reaped dividends. In the crucial spring, communities must mobilize for agriculture, hunting and resource accumulation, which will determine their survival prospects for the next winter. With the resumption of planting, hunting, and social activities, the knowledge preserved by elite families during the long winter nights became a community resource. The stories told around the campfire became a guide for practical decision-making. The family tree memorized on a comfortable night serves as the framework for organizing spring meetings and summer gatherings. With the resumption of seasonal activities and the expansion of social interaction, the cultural knowledge retained by elite families during the winter is redistributed to community benefits. In this way, the winter privileges of the elite justify themselves through spring productivity, demonstrating that concentrating resources on leading families during cold months is an investment in community capacity rather than merely personal consumption. The complex education that elite children receive on winter nights is transformed into leadership skills that serve the interests of the community. The social network maintained through the coordination of elite resources becomes the organizational infrastructure that benefits the spring and summer activities of the entire community. However, this reason has never been complete or permanent. Every winter, there are new leadership tests, new opportunities for the community to assess the performance of elites, and new challenges to redistribute privileges and power in response to the constantly changing environment and evolving community needs. The seasonal democracy unique to these communities means that elite privileges must be constantly acquired and justified through exemplary services for community welfare. As we prepare to move away from these images of winter privileges, it is necessary for us to reflect on the complexity of survival under extreme conditions, which they reveal. Comfortable longhouse, abundant food reserves, advanced heating system. These are not merely examples of inequality, but also evidence of how human society has developed social technologies to manage scarcity and uncertainty under conditions that test various aspects of human cooperation and wisdom. The winter elite privilege represents the community's investment in leadership, but it also creates a reasonable tension between efficiency and fairness, and indigenous communities have achieved varying degrees of success in this regard. Understanding these dynamics helps us recognize the achievements and vulnerabilities of social systems that are designed to survive under conditions that test all aspects of human cooperation. The balance between personal welfare and community interests, as well as between immediate equality and long-term survival, remains a challenge that requires continuous negotiation and adjustment. The legacy of the winter leadership model goes far beyond the cold months themselves. It shapes community structures, family relationships, and cultural values, influencing every aspect of life. The privileges maintained in winter create knowledge systems, social networks, and leadership abilities that serve the community throughout the seasonal cycle. The complex education provided for elite children on winter nights cultivates leaderships, skills, and serves the community's interests in every season. But they also cause dependence, inequality, and social tension, making communities vulnerable to destruction. When the traditional model is challenged by environmental changes, population pressure, or external disturbances, the concentration of resources and knowledge in elite families creates sufficiency under favorable conditions. However, when external forces challenge the established social model, vulnerability also arises. Perhaps most importantly, the experience of the winter elite reminds us that survival in extreme conditions requires social technology as complex as material technology. Communities that can thrive in the harsh winter are not only because they have developed effective techniques for keeping warm and finding food, but also because they have created social systems that can maintain cooperation, coordination, and collective commitment under conditions that test every kind of interpersonal relationship. The warmth of the long sleeved shirts and long gowns worn by the elites is not merely physical comfort. It is precisely the investment in social and intellectual resources that enables the entire community to survive under conditions where individual families cannot struggle alone. Whether these investments are reasonable and whether they serve the welfare of the community more than the self-interest of the elites remains a question that each community must answer through its own experience, its own values, and its own negotiations between survival needs and social justice. The complex social systems that can survive in winter represent the extraordinary achievements of human organization. The technology for managing resources and coordinating collective actions enables communities to thrive under conditions that challenge all aspects of human endurance. But they also represent moral challenges that remain relevant today. The issue of the relationship between individual privileges and social welfare, the legitimacy of inequality during times of crisis, and the balance between efficiency and fairness in social organizations. Winter always comes to an end, but the social relationships formed during the cold months, as well as the patterns of privilege and responsibility emerging from seasonal scarcity, continue to shape communities long after the snow melts and the land regains its abundance. The legacy of winter leadership, whether its achievements or its moral complexity, continues to influence community life in each season, creating social models that can enhance survivabilities while also creating vulnerabilities that can be exploited by external forces. Providing warm and comfortable longhouses in the deep winter has become a symbol of community achievement and social inequality, demonstrating human ingenuity in creating survival technologies, and at the same time raising the issue of the distribution of benefits and burdens that any successful community must address. The stories told by the winter night, elites sitting around the campfire, have become cultural resources serving the interests of the community. But they have also become tools for social reproduction, enabling privileges to be passed down from generation to generation, depending on changes in the environment and the evolution of values. They may serve or challenge community welfare. As we drift past the winter of the early inhabitants of North America at the end of our journey, let us pause between sleep and wake of signals, between the cold of the past few centuries and the comfortable warmth of the present. The winter we have traversed is neither a romantic adventure nor a dramatic survival story, but a quiet and enduring reality that has shaped the entire civilization. We felt a bone in his chilling cold and stayed there for several months. We have witnessed the meticulous calculation of survival, which determines who can see spring and who will be the price of winter. We have explored the mysteries buried by time in the necessary, yet disturbing privilege of scarcity. But perhaps most importantly, we have already witnessed some profound aspects of human resilience. This ability not only enables survival but also helps us find meaning, community, all of which dwarf our modern understanding of what humanity can tolerate. We have walked together. We start with you lying under the water buffalo hide, in a shelter that is almost unable to withstand the deadly wind. Your breath forms ice crystals in the darkness, and your body aches from the seemingly endless cold. We walked through the long winter with Ursine idle, watching her transform scarcity into sustainable development through wisdom, patience, and an oldest mathematical understanding of hope itself. We drift in the silence of archaeology, which preserves the mysteries of technology. These technologies are so complex that they transcend the need to leave physical traces, and the knowledge is so complete that it exists entirely in the practice of maintaining human success under non-human conditions. We have witnessed the complex dance of privilege and responsibility, which keeps some people warm and rich, while others calculate their daily rations as if in prayer. What emerges from these stories is not only admiration for human tenacity, but also an understanding of the different relationship with suffering itself. For those of us who visit these cold landscapes, winter is not an interruption of normal life, but an important part of the seasonal rhythm that gives meaning and structure to life. Although they have humanity, they fail to survive the winter. But precisely because of this, the social bond that unites the community during the coldest times is not an obstacle to overcome, but a technology as complex as any material innovation. The patience required to endure months of scarcity is not passive resignation to fate, but rather active practice of skills that make other forms of abundance possible. Winter teaches us what simple seasons cannot. It reveals the true power of social relations, the true effectiveness of leadership, and the true priorities that emerge when survival is in balance. Communities that have weathered the cold winter together possess knowledge and cooperation, resource management and collective endurance, which no individual preparation can match. But winter also teaches us humility. Every year it reminds people that no matter how exquisite human intelligence and wisdom are, they still rely on forces beyond human control. Even the best preparations, the most meticulous plans and the most solid social relationships may not be enough if the winter is particularly harsh or particularly long. When abundance returns, this humility creates different relationships. The harvest of spring, the reunion of summer, the preparation of autumn, all these carry the lessons of winter. Abundance will soon become scarce, and the line between comfort and disaster is so fragile. When you rest in a warm room, the surrounding technology makes survival seem automatic. It's worth considering what we might have lost in the process of obtaining modern isolation from seasonal difficulties. This does not mean that we should romanticize suffering or hope to return to a situation where so many lives have been taken away. However, perhaps we should consider what kind of wisdom vanishes when winter is no longer a teacher that requires our full concentration and respect. Tonight we share the stories of these people who know how to be patient, understand the community, and maintain a delicate balance between personal needs and collective welfare, which we may need more than we realize. They understand that survival is never an individual issue. The most important technology is social. True security does not come from accumulating resources, but from establishing relationships that can withstand pressure. They know how to find abundance in scarcity, how to create warmth through cooperation, and how to maintain hope through patience and endurance that are rarely needed or rewarded in modern life. They understand that some strength can only be cultivated by facing difficulties together, and some wisdom can only be learned through the seasons that test all the assumptions that humanity can bear. That perhaps most importantly, they have always been aware of the cycles that connect them to the natural world, not as victims of environmental forces beyond their control, but as participants in the seasonal rhythms that give life a predictable structure and reliable meaning. Winter will always come to an end. It will always come to an end. But for those we have visited, the end of winter will never return to where they lived before the cold began. They have endured every winter, constantly changing, sometimes weakened by losses and sometimes strengthened by endurance, always carrying forward the lessons that only extreme conditions can teach them. When spring is truly uncertain and when survival requires months of hard work, the arrival of spring has a different meaning. The first green sprouts that emerge in the melting snow are not only a sign of seasonal change, but also evidence that patience has paid off. Endurance is sufficient, and the gamble of survival has once again paid off. After spending the winter together and experiencing the spring together, the community has a bond that abundance alone cannot create. They not only share resources, but also have a deeper communication of mutual dependence under the condition that cooperation means the difference between life and death. The children who have experienced these winters have not only left behind personal memories, but also gained a collective understanding of what human society can achieve in its best conditions. The resilience they have learned is not an abstract concept, but a daily practice, not an individual's tenacity, but a social technique that transforms personal weaknesses into collective strength. Tonight, as you prepare to rest, perhaps you can hear the echoes of the wisdom developed by these winter survivors over centuries of seasonal extremes in the modern silence. It's not because we should try to recreate their hardships, but because we might benefit from remembering their discoveries about what makes life worth living when survival is not guaranteed. They have learned to find satisfaction in simple warmth, profound joy in abundant food, and true wealth in interpersonal relationships, which offer a security that personal resources cannot compare with. They found that luxury is not about having a large amount of property, but about having a rich social circle. There is nothing more than what you need, but know that when your own resources are insufficient, others will share what they have. They understand that the greatest sense of achievement for human beings does not come from evading difficulties, but from facing them together, not by eliminating uncertainty, but by developing the necessary skills and relationships to deal with it with grace and mutual support. Perhaps it is most suitable for our era of uncertain environment and social division. They know that sustainable development is not a technical issue with technical solutions, but a social challenge that requires wisdom on how to live within the constraints of nature while maintaining the qualities that make life worthwhile. As our winter trip draws to a close, immerse yourself in the comfort around you. Feel the warmth that doesn't require any effort from you. Savor the security provided by modern technology. Be grateful for the abundance that makes survival seem effortless and natural. However, for those who have created a completely different kind of abundance under conditions that test all human capabilities, perhaps you should be grateful. Remember that OT uses precise mathematical calculations for rations while maintaining the hope of the community. Think of those nameless construction workers. Their snow sheds left no trace, yet they kept their families through months of bone-chilling cold. Think of those elite families that have transformed privilege into responsibility. They maintain social technology with abundance, enabling the entire community to survive when individual families cannot struggle alone. Think about those mysteries buried in the silence of archaeology. Knowledge is so complex that it goes beyond the need for physical artifacts. Wisdom is so complete that it lies entirely in the successful practice of maintaining humanity under non-human conditions. Their winter has come to an end. The colds that challenged them, the scarcity that tested them, and the social bonds that held them together have all become historical memories and not only exist in stories like the one we share tonight. But spring will always come back just like now. Even if our own winter has become a memory, it will continue to return. The cycle that connects them with the natural world continues. The seasonal rhythm that gives meaning to their struggle is still changing. Suffering is temporary, but tenacity is enduring. This eternal promise still whispers in the darkness. Tonight, as sleep leads you into its own seasonal rhythm, perhaps you will dream of snow shining into the stars, of warm flames cast in the darkness of winter, of a community discovering abundance through sharing rather than accumulation, and of a community finding strength through cooperation rather than competition. Dream that you can endure the cold for months without losing hope, the wisdom to transform scarcity into sustainability, a social bond that can transform individual survival into collective victory. Dreaming of people facing the worst things in the world, they can not only endure them but also maintain their complete humanity in the process. Winter has taught them a lot. Spring rewarded their knowledge. Summer celebrates their survival. Autumn prepared the next test for them, testing everything they thought they knew and how to survive in this world. This world is both beautiful and dangerous, rich yet scarce cruel, but ultimately kind enough for them to keep on living. Their story continues in every winter that ends, every spring that begins, and in every community that chooses cooperation over competition, patience over despair, and hope over fear. Tonight, it continues to be in the warmth around you, in the comfort of your arms, and in the safety that allows you to rest without worrying about survival tomorrow. After enduring such a long winter, it has finally come to a complete end. The enlightenment it gives us is that as long as one has wisdom and patience, human beings can endure almost anything. Sleep now. Spring will always come. The next morning you woke up full, surrounded by an abundance that they could hardly have imagined. Inheriting their greatest talents, our abilities far exceed the knowledge we usually need to discover. The wind has stopped. The snow has melted. The cold has been dispelled. Have a good rest, travelers. Have a good rest. The journey came to an end through the teachings of winter. May your own season be gentle. May you inherit the wisdom of your predecessors, endure the cold. Only warmth makes sense. In the face of scarcity, abundance has value. Only by coexisting can a community have strength. Thank you for sharing this quiet moment with me. If you enjoy such slow-space travel, I post almost every day. Here is another peaceful story waiting for you, where you can subscribe to our Night History community and go with the flow.